Vectors. Now we're going to look at vectors because we need them when we continue our study of electricity with forces, because force is a vector. What's a vector? A vector is a quantity where we need more than just a number. We need a direction. For example, we have the vector r, and the vector r has a direction, which means it goes in a certain way. Because, for example, when you say there is a truck driving at 90 kilometers per hour, you want more information. You want to know where the truck is driving. Is it driving towards me? Is it driving away from me? Or what? So direction can be very important. It has, of course, a length. It has a length, the vector, which is an indication for its magnitude. But for that we need, of course, a scale. What is equal to 1? And for that we have the unit vector. The unit vector, for example, I here, is 1, has a length of 1. And if we put the unit vector several times into our vector we want to know, then we have the magnitude. For example, here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times the unit vector. So the scale or the magnitude for this vector r is 9. So we can write the vector r has a value 9 times the unit vector. We use I for one direction. When we have multiple dimensions, we use j for the y-axis, I for the x-axis, and k for the z-axis, but that's not for now. Good. We're gonna go with the next point, that's adding vectors. We have two vectors, r1 and r2, and we're going to add them together to form a resulting vector r. Watch out, this is not the same as this. Those little arrows on top of the vectors, they're important. We cannot just drop them, because when we do this, we add those values together. And we cannot do that with a vector, because two vectors together can have a different direction. For example, r1 goes in this direction, slightly up, r2 goes in this direction, slightly down, and when we add them together we have to use the parallelogram rule, which means we use both directions, then we make a parallelogram out of them, and we connect the origin point with the opposite parallelogram point, and we have our resulting vector. So, and if you know your mathematics, you will know that the length of r1 plus the length of r2 will not be the same like the length of our resulting vector. Another way to add those vectors is we have r1 and r2. We put r2 behind r1 like this, and then we connect beginning point with end point, which is in fact the same as here. This method is easier when you have, for example, 3 or 4 vectors to add together. Now, how do we calculate the length of r, the resulting vector? Well, we have for that the cosine rule, which is r is the square root from r1 squared plus r2 squared plus 2 times r1, r2, and the cosine alpha. Which is alpha? It's the angle between r1 and r2. In mathematics you sometimes will find a cosine rule, a minus here, but the alpha is then also different. Then this will be the alpha and not this. But it's logical, more logical in physics to use the angle between both vectors. Good. Now, most of the time you will have special cases which are very easy. For example, the two vectors have the same direction. We have r1 in this direction and r2 in the same. Then, of course, the resulting vector will be very easy to calculate, because it will just be one behind the other, r1, r2 behind that one, and that's our resulting vector. In that case, the angle is 0, and we get this from when we work it out. So this cosine of 0 is 1, so we have r1 squared plus 2 r1 r2 plus r2 squared, which of course algebra says us equals this one. And this is the only case where you really can say the resulting vector is r1 plus r2 without the arrows, which is the same as with the arrows in this case. Then we have the two vectors have an opposite direction, r1 to the right, r2 to the left. Then we will have a resulting vector, which is of course the length of r1 minus the length of r2. If we fill in here we have the cosine of 180 degrees, which is -1. So this becomes r squared is r1 squared minus 2 r1 r2 plus r2 squared. Algebra teaches us that this is the same as r is r1 minus r2. So we just have to make the difference between the two vectors. And then we have the two vectors are perpendicular. We have r1 here, r2 there, and adding those together is also rather easy, which makes the cosine of 90, the cosine of 90 is 0, which makes us formula like this: r is the square root of r1 squared plus r2 squared, and that is of course Pythagoras. So that was it. Now we go to look at the law of Coulomb, Coulomb's law.